Hello and welcome to the Big G Video Podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about Lumafusion and Final Cut Pro for the iPad. Now, my channel has been really built on Lumafusion. When I first started my channel, I had a PC. My PC wasn't great. It was quite good, but it wasn't great. And it wasn't great for editing videos. Editing videos was really difficult. And I had to transcribe the videos into different formats, or the video files into different formats, just so I could edit them. And I was using Sony Vegas. I bought an iPad. I could run Lumafusion on my iPad, and all of a sudden I could work with all those video files I had from my DSLR that I was having to transcribe to work on my PC editing software, and I could just run them. And I could just put them into Lumafusion and I could edit them. Now, editing on a mobile device is not as good as editing on a desktop device, but I looked past that. And then when I was getting 4K cameras, I could use Lumafusion to edit these 4K files and output 4K files. And then I could upload them to YouTube. And so many of my videos were made on Lumafusion. And I didn't have the best iPad. I didn't have an iPad Pro. I just had a standard iPad with, I think, 128 gigs of storage, and I was just creating loads of videos on Lumafusion. Lumafusion got bigger and bigger, and one of the problems I had with Lumafusion was it had bugs in, and editing on mobile stuff can be annoying because you want to make a change to a clip, you've got to go into a new screen in that clip to make a change, and then you've got to come out, and then you want to make another change, you've got to go into another screen. So it's not in any way as quick as editing on a desktop. But I was also finding with Sony Vegas at the time that I think I was on a couple of upgrades of Sony Vegas. I was maybe on Sony Vegas 12. I originally started on Sony Vegas 8. I was finding it was crashing all the time. It wasn't as good as it used to be. Sony Vegas 8 never really crashed. I built some really complicated videos using Sony Vegas 8, but I kept, as software sort of expired and got replaced, I got the upgrades, and I was just finding Sony Vegas 12 was almost becoming unusable. And again, I had an okay PC. Wasn't the best, it wasn't a gaming PC, but it was okay. So I just completely switched to using Lumafusion, even though it had a few bugs that meant I'd have to, particularly with text, open up the text, then I'd come out of it, then I had to go back in and do it again, because for whatever reason it wasn't working. Then I got myself an iPad Pro alongside having a Mac, and Lumafusion just wasn't cutting it anymore, really. It just wasn't that good. So I could edit really quickly using Final Cut Pro for my MacBook, and I just dropped Lumafusion. I just did editing on my Mac. Not only was it easier to use, but it was quicker, and I could do more things because I could get plugins, and I just got more things I could do in editing. So I just switched to Final Cut Pro. Then when I had my iPad Pro, Final Cut for the iPad came out. Now before that, DaVinci Resolve for the iPad came out, and I wasn't that impressed with it. But Final Cut for the iPad came out, and lo and behold, it was a subscription model. But I thought I'll give it a try, and I could edit things on my iPad and do a very good job of editing with Final Cut Pro on my iPad Pro. And I would use that to edit certain things, and if I was working remotely or wanted to edit remotely, then I would do that and use the iPad Pro. I never did anything where I started on the iPad and I finished on the MacBook in Final Cut Pro. I never did anything like that. Ironically, I did do that with Lumafusion, because Lumafusion had an expansion you could buy where you could export the project with an XML file, and you could just import it into Final Cut Pro. I found not everything worked particularly well. Sometimes you're expecting a certain file or a certain text and you've got like an image. But if you were doing very light cuts and just putting together a timeline, you could certainly do it on Lumafusion, export it to Final Cut Pro, and then carry on your MacBook. So I tried Final Cut Pro on the iPad and I did like it, but it was never going to be as good as on the Mac. But it did have bonuses in that it was portable, and I could actually ask my children to do some video editing for me if I wanted, and they could do it very easily on the iPad of Final Cut Pro, but they couldn't do it at all using the Mac. So it had its uses, and then when it came to the end of my subscription, I didn't renew it and I let my subscription lapse, and I didn't really have a need to use Lumafusion again. I didn't really have a need to use Final Cut Pro for the iPad again. But then I went on holiday and I was doing quite a lot of video editing on holiday, and I already had Lumafusion installed, so I just started editing in Lumafusion. By now the bugs that had annoyed me before had gone from Lumafusion. They didn't seem to be there. And I spent ages building this video, and I went to export it and I couldn't export it. Now by this point I've got the add-on to do exporting XMLs, and I've got the add-on to do speed ramping, and I did like the speed ramping. So because I was away on holiday, I didn't really have internet access, so I couldn't work out, or I couldn't get any help or look up what the issue was. I just knew I spent ages making this video and I couldn't export it because it kept crashing. And I thought, there we go again, Lumafusion's got a bug and Lumafusion's got a problem. When I got home, within 10 minutes I'd worked out what the problem was, because I looked it up online, and I was able to go into one of the menu settings, change something, and lo and behold my video exported. But it did make me think, Lumafusion. Now with Final Cut Pro for the iPad, it just works. It works really well. It never crashes, there are never any problems, it's intuitive, it's easy to use, it's good, but it does cost £50 a year on a subscription, whereas Lumafusion I've already paid for. I've got my money's worth out of it a long time ago because I used it so much. Now with Lumafusion, they recently added a plugin where you could do tracking and blurring of faces, and I thought that's quite good. You can do that very well on Final Cut Pro on the Mac. Can't do it very well on the iPad or at all. So I thought that's good, so I've got that. I'm still trying it out. I've used it for a couple of use cases, but I did find while it's quite powerful, it might slow, you might need to drop your preview down and other things. But I did go back to Final Cut Pro for the iPad, simply because there's one thing that Lumafusion can't do, and there's one thing that Final Cut for the Mac can't do, but you can do on the iPad. And I think this is going to save me loads of time, so I'm very keen to do it. Quite often the way I work is I record like the talking face headshots, talky bit, and then later I put B-roll in. So I found that the way I like to work is I do the recording of me talking, I cut it up, and then I work out then when I need B-roll. I only do the minimum B-roll that I need. I don't do a lot of B-roll, and I do B-roll to really help tell the story or show something, or most importantly, cover up a nasty cut. So where I've done a cut, I might want to make that cut less problematic by putting B-roll over it. So the way I found to work out how much B-roll I need, where I need B-roll, is to do my editing in Final Cut Pro on my Mac, export the video, import it into my iPad, and use Final Cut Pro for the iPad for its one feature that makes it really stand out, and that is the ability just to write on top of it. So Final Cut Pro for the iPad, it is the only software that I know of where you can take a stylus and you can just draw or write on it. So as I watch the edited version through where I've done all my cuts, I just write on, using the live draw feature, what B-roll should be there, and I know where it's supposed to go because I can tell where I started writing. So I'll just sit down and I'll just write on my iPad where the B-roll should be and what type of B-roll I need to film, and then when I want to film my B-roll, I've got just a guide of what to do. I need 3 shots of this and it needs to turn this way and so on, and I can really do my B-roll much quicker rather than just filming B-roll for the sake of it and then knowing it's there. I can actually watch a video, think about the B-roll and just write it on the screen. And for that, Final Cut Pro for the iPad is absolutely great. I can do sketches and drawings, and there's no real way that I found I can do that once I've done my edits to my talkie bit. So I couldn't do that in Lumafusion at all. I just couldn't find a way to do it. You could use the new plugin because you can do some drawing, but it annoyed me and it wasn't very intuitive, and you'd click there and then if you took your stylus off, it created a shape, and it was just an ugly way to do it. So I much prefer doing it in Final Cut Pro for the iPad. So for me, sadly, the subscription model is still there. I'd rather just buy it outright like I did for my Mac, but there we are. But it is getting use in sort of managing my B-roll. So I am starting to use it for that because Lumafusion isn't very good at that. So Final Cut Pro for the iPad does have a place. Lumafusion is always going to be Lumafusion. It's always going to be, you don't need such a technical device or such a high power device as an iPad Pro to run it, because Final Cut Pro for the iPad only runs on the iPad Pro. Lumafusion you can run on your phone and a lower spec iPad. But Lumafusion has always been good, and I do appreciate Lumafusion. It helped get my channel started. So now I'm going to talk about the videos I made this week. I made a review of the Insta360 X5, and there's a real irony here because during the review my X5 broke, so I'm not sure what's wrong with it. I've had to send it off to Insta360. It'll turn on but it won't do anything. The screen is emitting light but it's black, and I'm just not sure what's wrong with it. It was a very odd issue. But anyway, I did a long-term review of the X5. The week before that, the podcast episode, I talked about the X5, but this was it was similar, but it was also different. So you can watch both and get a good impression of the X5. I also made a review of a really small Ulanzi cube light called the DG01, which I think is going to be really, really useful. And I did a small review of a mount for the Insta360 Go 3S, because I've started recording stuff at BTS with the backpack I'm wearing, and the straps are very thick, so the standard clip for the baseball cap just didn't work with the Go 3S. So there wasn't really a suitable backpack mount for the Go 3S, and the Go 3S is ideal to mount for your backpack or mount on your backpack and do BTS footage that way. So it was £10 and it seemed quite good and it works really well, so I'm really pleased. Thank you. Goodbye.